Hello and welcome back to Widowed AF. You're here with Rosie Gill-Moss. And today I am welcoming Emma Charlesworth. Hello, Emma.
Hi, Rosie.
So Emma is joining us from not that far from me as it goes. I get these applications in sometimes and it's kind of scary how many live quite close to me. But our paths have not crossed yet. So I'm really interested to talk to Emma in particular, because Emma's husband, Charlie, and I am going to correctly say his name is Stuart, but you will refer to him as Charlie throughout the interview. I'll let you tell why when you start. Now, he died from COVID in April 2020, and he died in a hospital not far from where John was dying from COVID. Now, my outcome was different, luckily for me. Emma and I have spoken already about this and to check that we're both comfortable. So we're going to talk and we may cry. Who knows? Both of us have just said we don't know where this is going to go. But I'm going to let Emma tell you guys her story now. So without further ado, Emma, off you go.
Thank you. So my husband, his actual name was Stuart. But I'd known him for 18 months before I established that wasn't his name, and I'd been calling him Charlie. You know what it's like. You meet people and they just introduce themselves as Charlie. So friends called him Charlie. So that's what I called him. I had known him since I was 15. We got together at my 18th birthday party. So by the time you fast forward to So by the time you fast forward to 2020, we had been together for 21 years. He had...
Wow, so you'd been together longer than you hadn't?
Yes. Yeah, been together 21 years at that
longer
point.
Than you've not been together. Oh, wow.
And then he had also had cancer. So he had cancer a long time ago. He had his first chemotherapy session on my 20th birthday. And the reason I mention that is because it will become apparent in a minute while I'm referring my birthday. But yeah, so he had his first chemo session.
I'm nodding my head because I know this.
20th, first chemo session on my 20th birthday. And then our daughter was born in 2010. And yeah, that was our life, really, running around like loons most of the time. And then COVID hit and it was on the telly. It was one of those things that it was on the telly and everybody kept saying to us, it was getting more and more, but I can remember this so vividly. Like I'd been talking to a colleague at work who was talking to us about an asteroid hitting. And I can remember Charlie on the 7th of March saying to me, I really fancy some chocolate. And I was like, oh, just stick it in the trolley. I was like, because if COVID doesn't kill us, the asteroid will. Just like flippant, as you do when you've been with someone for forever, just really flippant. Anyway, so that was the 7th of March. And then we got the whole work from home and schools closing and everything like that. And then on the 22nd of March, which was Mother's Day, we'd played a board game. We'd all been indoors. And he suddenly was like, I feel a bit warm. So we took his temperature and he had a temperature. But he didn't have a cough. So we took his temperature, had a temperature, and he did a Facebook post. And his last ever Facebook post finished with the phrase, I'll see you on the other side. Because to him, he was like, it was a picture of Mickey Flanagan. And he was like, I haven't been out in days, but I'm now in. Who knows what I've got, but I'll see you on the other side. But it was just... Yeah.
Funnily enough, I remember posting one with like the plague sign across saying we've got the plague, we'll see you when we see you kind of thing. Yeah.
And that was that. And, you know, he steadily went downhill over the course of that week. And all I kept clinging to was he doesn't have a cough, We spoke to 111 on a couple of occasions because, of course, this is so early. So the 23rd of March was when we went into lockdown. So he came down with the temperature the day before we went into lockdown. So we watched Boris's announcement together, shutting everything down, putting us into lockdown. And there was no testing. So we didn't really know, as you will remember, you don't know you've got it. 111 said, the worst of the symptoms will come out in the first 10 days. So don't worry about it. You've just got to ride it out. Okay. He got steadily more and more lethargic, I think is the best word I would use. He had no energy. It was very difficult, but he still wasn't coughing. And that's all we're hearing about in those early stages, cough temperature. So I was like, you've probably got the flu. Like, you probably haven't even got it. And then on the Saturday, so this would have been the 28th of March, I remember him having a plum and some minestrone soup and telling me it tasted funny. And I was just a bit like, oh, okay, fair enough. It tastes funny. Again, I didn't think anything of it because we didn't know at that point that that was a symptom. And then that day was really hard. He looked at me. He was lying in bed and he just looked at me and went, "I'm so scared, Em." And to see someone, a grown man lying in bed, looking at me going, "I'm just so scared, Em." So I rang 111 again and we spoke to a doctor. And even then I was like, but he's all right. He's not coughing. It's ridiculous what you cling to, I think, in these times. And then, again, the doctor then gave us a private number for Medoc, so we wouldn't need to go through 111. So Medoc is the on-call doctor for the Medway area, so that if something happened, we wouldn't need to go through 111. And then on the Sunday, he came downstairs and he watched a Harry Potter film with my daughter. And she will now tell you about the fact I didn't let her cuddle him, but I was still trying to keep her safe. And as a mother, we didn't know enough about it. We were all in the same house. And I mean, Charlie and I were still in the same bed. We weren't properly isolating because, again, we didn't really know what properly isolating meant. We were like, well, we're all in the same house. And again, that I am so glad I was in the same room as him because so at 9:30 on the Sunday night, I was doing my ironing. I was watching my Jason Donovan concert, as I do on a regular basis. and Charlie was shaving in the bathroom and I went up and said, "Do you need me to stay in here with you?" And he said, no, I'll be fine. You go back downstairs. I was like, okay. And so I did that, went downstairs, went up to bed. And then at about 1 o'clock in the morning, I woke up and I thought he was having a panic attack. So he was just a bit delirious. He was a bit short of breath. And there was something not quite right. But even then, I didn't think this has gone hideously wrong because I'd been doing research online and people had been saying that they're delusional at nighttime because they're sleeping too much in the day. So I can remember putting on Bruce Springsteen live on Broadway for him to watch on Netflix to try and calm him down. Music was Charlie's life. He was a singer. He was in 3 bands. You know, music was his life. So I thought if we put music on, it will calm him down. I dozed back off again. And then just after 3:30ish, I woke up and it was just, this is gone. This is out of my hands now. I can't look after him. And again, this is why I referenced the fact I was in bed with him. And he was, the only way I can describe it was he was trying to cough it out of him by this point. So he was coughing, spitting into a tissue and then throwing the tissue away and then getting a new tissue. And I was like, hang on, this has gone. This is serious now. I don't know what's happening. But I was the sort of person that left her phone downstairs and didn't have it turned on overnight. That was the last night I've ever done that. It's never been done since. So I trundled down the stairs.
I wish I could say the same.
I trundled down the stairs to ring Medoc. And something in me as I went down the stairs went, Emma, just ring an ambulance. Just get an ambulance. So I rang 999 and I said, I think my husband's having a panic attack. I need help. And so she then said, well, what's going on? So I described it. And then I just, almost by the by, I just went, 111 think he's got COVID, but he's not got a cough. I kept clinging to that. He's not got a cough. So at this point then, Rebecca had woken up. And as a mother, it was the most heartbreaking thing in the world that I couldn't cuddle her because I had to be looking after him and no one could come into the house. So all I could literally do was ring my mum and say, can you talk to her on the phone? I need her to be looked after. So she's sat in the lounge on her own at the age of 10, doing colouring at 3 a.m. to utter carnage going on. And all she had was my mum at the end of a phone. And that haunts me. I think that will haunt me forever. And then the paramedics turned up. I don't know how long it was. It felt like an age. And I can remember describing to Rebecca saying, I think it's going to be a bit like E.T. And they came in like fully suited and booted, like almost like a forensic scene. Yeah. They had the masks and their blue shoes on their feet, the blue things on their feet.
That's exactly it.
And it felt like E.T. And then they came in. And at this point, I mean, I'm running up and down the stairs in my dressing gown, my big fluffy slippers, carnage. And at this point, shock kicked in, and I just looked at him and I just went, this is the most elaborate way out of getting a birthday card I have ever seen. And this is why I referenced my birthday for the chemo, because this is all happening in the early hours of my 39th birthday. So I was just like, brilliant, here we go again. And then the paramedics, I kept saying, come on, Charlie, just breathe, just calm down. So the paramedics are like, Charlie, is that his name? And I was like, no, his name's Stuart. Because I was just like, oh God, they can't take him to hospital thinking he's called Charlie Charlesworth because they'll never find his records. But it was just like in this panic, you just don't know what you're doing. And then it was, and this is why, again, I say I'm so grateful I was in bed with him, because the paramedics were in the room and they were attending to him. And that was when his lips went blue and his pupils dilated. As I was looking at him, and I just was like, okay, this is serious. This is actually serious. And they put the oxygen mask on him. And again, I'm pretty much convinced if I hadn't called 999, he'd have died in my bed that night. They put the oxygen mask on him. And then I remember him looking at me and saying, all right, I'm back now. This is me. Can you just sit me up a little bit? All right. Okay. All right. We've gone from pupils, like, okay, you're back. Okay.
The wonders of oxygen, hey?
The wonders of oxygen. And now obviously it wasn't a panic attack, and the oxygen had there wasn't enough oxygen going to his brain and whatever. And they said that they were going to take him, and they were going to take him to Medway, and they needed to check him over. And I was to ring A&E in 2 hours. I was like, okay. And even after what I'd witnessed, I thought I was going to go and pick him up in 2 hours' time. Because I'd seen the oxygen. I was like, that's all he needed. He just needed a little bit of help. And so he then walked down the stairs to the ambulance, which he did that for Rebecca. I'm convinced he wasn't going to have her see him carried out of the house. And he walked down the stairs to the ambulance, and I made her shout that she loved him as he walked out. I don't remember if I said the same. I don't know. I can't remember that. But I remember saying to her, just tell Daddy you love him. And we got in. It's about 4:30 in the morning at this point. I don't actually know what the hell is going on. And then I can remember walking upstairs with her, because then I was like, right, I need to strip the bed, because if he's got COVID, I've got to strip the bed, and I need to jump in a shower. And your brain just goes kind of all over the show, doesn't it? And I
automatic pilot.
Yeah. Yeah. And I stood at the top of our stairs, and she looked at me and said, is Daddy going to be okay? Now, I don't know where I pulled it from, but I knew I couldn't lie to her. And I know on previous episodes there's been discussions about being honest with children. The easiest thing would have been to say, yes. But something in me, even with this lack of sleep and all this other carnage going on, knew that I couldn't lie. And I can remember looking at this little face just full of hope, saying, I don't know. And she just looked at me, and I said, I don't know, but I promise you the doctors and the nurses will do everything they can to make Daddy okay. But I don't know if Daddy's going to be okay. And then I just hugged her.
God, that's just awful, isn't it?
It was just, it was one of those moments of, I'm so glad I did it. And she references it now, that I didn't lie and I didn't make false promises to her. And then we downloaded Disney Plus. And we started watching Disney films, because when
like
all
the
else
rest
fails,
of the country, I believe, around that time.
When all else fails, what do? You go to Disney. And then I rang the hospital 2 hours later, and they told me he had been sedated and ventilated and was in ITU. And that was that.
Shit. So you had no idea that was going to happen?
Nope. I didn't get a call first. I didn't know what they didn't. I've heard other I've heard other stories, and I know when you interviewed the lovely Emma, Emma, whose husband Jamie died. I think she got a call to say it was happening, but I never got it. So the first time, so they said he agreed to it, and then he was gone. That was it, sedated and ventilated. And
see, John was taken in and he was conscious, so they kind of asked him and he was able to text me. But I don't think they give them much choice or gave them much choice. It was, John said, he asked, well, what happens if you don't? And they said, there is no don't.
Yeah. And it must just have been so frightening. And, you know, John would have agreed to it in a bid to save his life. Charlie would have agreed to it thinking that he would have been saying, yeah, I'll go on a ventilator for a little bit and then I'll come out. Like, that's what he would have agreed to. And I know that. And
well, it was a week. I know John, said a week.
And then I just kind of spoke to the doctors a bit later. And then what was really weird was that then I was getting the messages, because all this has happened in the middle of the night. So and again, shock makes you do funny things. But I was like, we won't ring people in the middle of the night. We won't disturb their sleep. They can't do anything anyway.
Don't want to disturb anyone.
I don't want to disturb anyone. And so I'm getting these messages saying, happy birthday. Hope Charlie's feeling better.
Course.
Happy birthday. Hope it's a good one, despite the strange circumstances. And I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ, now what do I do? And I can remember just about 7 o'clock, I rang my sister and I just burst into tears down the phone. And I was like, I'm so scared. I'm just so scared. I don't know what's happening in my life. And I just felt, and this is a point that I can come back to, I just felt so out of control. And I'm a control freak. I laminate holiday itineraries, for crying out loud, Rosie. So I was out of control. And
I need you in my life.
And it was just, I just was like, I can't do anything. And so I would ring the hospital once in the morning and then once before Rebecca went to bed to get an update. And then if nobody rang me in the meantime, I assumed he was okay, or as okay as he could be. And about 10 days in, they then got too busy at Midway and said that they would ring me once a day with an update. So again, we were just working on the theory that no news was good news. And then it was Easter Sunday, so he'd been in for 2 weeks, and a consultant rang me and she said, he's not getting better. There is only so much we can try. I was like, okay. And she said, has anyone told you to prepare for your husband to never come home? And I said, no.
Shit.
No one's done that. And she said, well, I am doing that now.
Jesus, Emma.
And of course, this is just all done over the phone. You're not seeing the white in people's eyes. I still at this point have not seen him. I've not seen him. I spent a lot of the time thinking, I don't even know if I got the right bloody person. Like, he walked down the stairs. How am I having this conversation? And I can remember going in and saying to Rebecca, this is what I've just been told. And she went, okay. And I said, do you understand what I am saying to you? And she said, you are telling me that Daddy might die, aren't you? And I was like, yes, I am. She went, okay. And then I just cuddled her. This was my default. Let's just cuddle her. And I think those cuddles were probably as much for me as they were for her, because no one, and again,
of course
you know what it was like at this
were.
time. No one's coming in. No one's cuddling me. No one's taking control of my life for me. No one's looking after me. I'm on my own. And I wasn't, because I made a very conscious decision that I was telling our story on social media. And this will probably play into why my path has gone the way it has over the past 3 years. So I told our story on social media, and the amount of support I got virtually was, it carried me through, because I couldn't get physical support, and it just carried me through. Sorry, you were saying.
It was one of the weird positives of, no, do you know what? I talk over people all the time. I do apologise. No, it was one of the weird positives of COVID, because I have a mixed relationship with social media. I don't love it, but I also kind of like it. And I did the same thing. I did a daily, and also because the amount of people wanting to know what's happening, and everybody's very scared because this is something that's happening it's Russian roulette. Nobody knows. So I found myself taking this role of kind of, so truth sayer and telling everybody what happened. And in the end, I thought, I'm just going to do a post every day on Facebook or Instagram. And I did. And like you, I had, people around the world willing him on. And
Yeah.
who knows whether it works, but it makes you feel less alone.
Yeah, it did. And, one of my oldest friends, we met at secondary school when I was 11, and I was bridesmaid for her and she was my matron of honour. And she started ringing me and she said, I can't do messages, Emma. She said, I need to speak to you. She's like, because I can't get in a car and come to you. And she, to this day, has kept it up. And every Wednesday at 9:00, unless one of us is doing something, she still does that to this day, because she started it then.
Lovely.
And she was like, it shouldn't stop just because he's died. So we still do it. We're 3 years on, and my family all know.
What's your friend's name?
My friend's name's Lorraine. And
well, thank you, Lorraine.
And it was, and my family know, like, if they ring me between like the hours of 9 and 10:30 on a Wednesday, they'll suddenly say, oh, ring me back when Lorraine, sorry, I forgot it's Lorraine time. But she started it, and
Aww.
It's one of those, again, it's a positive to come out of it. Like, we didn't talk weekly before, we talk weekly now, most of the time. We've not done anything exciting, but we just connect once a week. So all this was going on. And then the next morning, so I had to make some calls and say, he's not going to make it. And then the next morning, I got a call from a lady called Mel at Medway Hospital. And she said, right, I'm ringing to set up your Skype. I was like, I'm sorry, what? And they had managed to get Skype in. And no one told me it was coming. So I got the message that he's not going to make it the day before. And then they said we can Skype him, and I was a bit like, okay. She said, so we'll call you back later. And at that point, I didn't know what he would look like, and I don't know if that sounds weird, but I just didn't know what I was going to see on the screen. So I didn't let Rebecca do that first one with me. And he looked relatively peaceful. Like, I can remember looking at him going, you've got a nice colour. Like, you just look like you're asleep. And so they were like, we will do this every day. And I was like, okay. And these two ladies then
Emma, let me just clarify. Was he unconscious at this time? He was fully intubated. He wasn't conscious.
No. And these two ladies, Mel and Sharon at Medway, became my lifeline for a week. And every day we had a 10-minute Skype call where we could see him. And every day I would say to Rebecca, do you want to talk to Daddy today? Because I knew it was hard for her, like, just so difficult. And she would say to me, well, I'll talk to him today because he's here today, isn't he? And he might not be tomorrow. And I was just like,
gosh.
Yeah. Because she's so pragmatic.
Mind on such a young thing.
But children are, aren't they? They're so black and white.
Yes.
And so we would talk to him every day. And then on the Friday, he had his eyes open. And that was the first time we had seen his eyes open. But it was reassuring because I was like, they have got the right person. And we'd sent in, it was so bizarre, but we'd sent in, Medway had a thing, and I don't know if Maidstone had the same thing, but Medway had this thing where you could send in emails and letters and they would be taken to the right department and read out to patients. And so he was surrounded by photos. And after he died, I got them, they were all sent to me, all the messages that had been sent in, which was a hugely emotional thing to see what everybody was saying to him. And I sent them across photos, and they printed them, and they were all around him whenever we did these Skype calls. And then on the Saturday, he was trying to move his mouth. He couldn't say anything. He was still, fully on the ventilator and couldn't say anything, but he was trying to move his mouth. And that was hard to watch. That was very, very difficult to watch. And then I got a call an hour or so later to say, actually, they'd re-sedated him. He was too tired. And I said, well, if he's too tired for the Skype calls, let's not do it. And that night was the first night I lost it. And I don't know if I've ever spoken about this before, and I don't know if people know, but I completely lost it. And I got so angry. And I ended up, I'm very fortunate that I work for a company that have a counselling helpline. And I rang them, and I think I basically shouted and cried at them for about an hour and a half, because I was angry at the world for bringing this into our lives. I was angry at him for not getting better, which I knew was irrational, and I knew it wasn't his fault, but I couldn't do anything to help him. And I just wanted him home to our little girl. And I was just so angry at everything. I was angry that I couldn't take her out. I couldn't take her from McDonald's, or I couldn't take her to the cinema to distract her, and she didn't have school, and she had no normality, and I had no normality. And I was just angry, just so angry. And I literally shouted and cried at the counsellor for about an hour and a half on that Saturday night, which I think I'm really glad I did, because then the following morning I got a call to say he wasn't going to make it.
It sounds like you really needed to have that hour-long shout and cry, though. And just talking to you now, I can very much get the impression that you are the kind of the linchpin, and everything. You're in control. You keep everything moving. And during this time, you can't even give her the comfort of normality. You can't even give her structure and school and things that they probably wouldn't think they wanted, but they desperately need. And I'm just thinking back to, I had a 10-year-old in lockdown as well. But I'm thinking back to when Ben died, and how the boys were back in school a couple of days later, and how they got all the support from their peers. And of course, you and Rebecca have just been denied all this. And you just mentioned then briefly before I talked over you, then got the call the next day saying that he wasn't going to make it. And that must have just been so heartbreaking, Emma. And just tell us a little bit about that if you can.
Yeah, so, and like I say, I'm glad I got it out of my system, because I think if I hadn't have got it out of my system and spoken to a counsellor who rationalised it and said, everything you are feeling is normal, do not beat yourself up about it. Yeah. I think then to get that call, I would have then been dealing with insane guilt that I had been angry with him irrationally, yes, and now he was dying. But they'd kind of spoken it all through with me, and I knew that this was absolutely normal, and I was under an enormous amount of stress and trauma. And so we were tidying Rebecca's bedroom at the time. I was on the floor, and my phone rang with a private number, which was not unusual, because that's how it worked with the Skype calls. So we kind of would just get this call roughly around midday, and then Mel and Sharon would be like, can you be ready at 2? And I want to say they were amazing. They put themselves in danger every day so that we could Skype. And I can remember on the Saturday that Mel had said that it was her day off. And I said, but why are you here? And she said, because you need this more than I do. She said, you need to see your husband more than I need a day off. And this is what I mean, the sacrifices they made. They were like my lifeline. And so the phone rang, and it didn't cross my mind. And at the same time that the phone rang, in a complete, like, fabulous moment, my mum would do a daily walk every day and just come and stand and talk to us on the driveway. And so as the phone rang, the doorbell rang. So Rebecca went downstairs and opened the door, and it was my mum. And I got a call from the most amazing nurse in the world. And I'll explain why she's amazing in a minute. But she told me he wasn't going to make it. His heart couldn't cope anymore, and he wasn't going to make it. And I had been expecting someone to say, do you want to Skype at 2? I wasn't expecting that. And I can remember we'd been tidying Rebecca's room, and I was kneeling on the floor just going, well, how do I go downstairs and tell my child that this is actually going to happen to us? And she said, do you want to come in? And that was the first time I'd been offered the opportunity to go in, and they asked if I wanted to go in to say goodbye. And she said, but we don't have enough PPE for both of you. So if you come in, you then need to isolate away from Rebecca for 7 days. And so I said, no, I'm not coming in. It was that, no, I was like, her daddy's not dying, and then her mother away from her for 7 days. And I tell this story now, and everybody is like, oh my God, that must have been a heartbreaking decision. And it wasn't, because I didn't have chance to think. I mean, it probably was heartbreaking, but I didn't have time. It's not like someone went, go away and think about it for a couple of days. And I didn't have the time to agonize. It was like, no, she's not away from me. So we did a final Skype call, and I can remember walking downstairs, and telling her that her daddy was going to die and that he was going to be the brightest star in the sky. And then we just had to wait for the final Skype call to say goodbye. At this point, my mum just went, I'm sitting on this driveway until this is done. So that's what my mum did. She sat on my driveway for 4 hours. But again, I don't, as a mother, I don't know what that must have felt like for her. Because even then people were like, why didn't you break the rules? And I was like, he was dying of COVID. I'm not breaking any rules. I'm not losing anybody else to this. So she literally was stood on my driveway. She's watching her eldest child tell her eldest granddaughter that her daddy's going to die, and she didn't hug us. She couldn't hug us. She was powerless. And as a mother, I can only imagine what that must have been like for my mum to watch. So we did the Skype call, and Rebecca would jabber away to him. And then at one point she went, Daddy, we haven't really done very much. It's like lockdown. So I've run out of things to tell you. So I'm just going to talk to Nana. I'll be back. And off she went to talk to my mum, who still sat on my driveway. And then about an hour in, the nurse, who was called Noreen, said to me, Emma, do you need a cup of tea? And I was like, yeah, I do. She went, go make yourself a cup of tea. I'm here. I've got him. Just go make yourself a cup of tea. And I was in the kitchen and I could hear her just chatting away to him. She was Irish. She had this Irish lilt to her. And I later found out that she had retired from ITU a few months previously and had gone back because of the pandemic. So she wasn't even meant to have been working. And this is what I mean about how amazing everybody was. And then I went back, and I can remember apologising to him that I hadn't been able to protect him, and promising to look after Rebecca. And then that was that. We just said goodbye, because they'd said don't necessarily say goodbye because we don't know how much he can hear. So don't necessarily use the words goodbye. And then put the phone down. And I can remember going out and my mum's still on the driveway. And I can remember just looking at my mum and going, but I don't know where our Christmas decorations go. My mum was like, Emma, it's April. Oh. And Charlie was like, our house gets turned into a grotto at Christmas. He would wear a Christmas T-shirt or jumper throughout the entire month of December. He was so precise about Christmas and the tree and the decorations. And I was just looking at my mother going, but he can't die because I don't know where our Christmas decorations go. And then he'll get cross with me. And just all these irrational thoughts. And then a couple of hours later, they rang. And I will tell you we were watching Frozen. Rebecca will tell you we were watching Frozen too. It was a Frozen, but we can't remember which one. And then the call came to say he'd died 10 minutes previously.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you. And it was just, but even that was surreal, because I was like, what do I do with this information? No one can come and help me.
Yeah.
No one can come. So I'll, and I can remember I'd just come out of the bathroom, which he would find hysterical, really. But I'd just come out of the toilet when I got the call. And then I went, okay. Looked at Rebecca and went, shall we finish watching the film then? I was just like, what difference does it make if I tell someone weird? Now or in an hour? Like, let's just go and finish the film.
Yeah.
And then I did
let her have that last half hour.
Have that half hour. And then after that, I rang his dad and his two sisters to tell them. And then I looked at Rebecca and went, horrible job. And then I looked at Rebecca and went, dinner then. Because I was like, I can't order takeout. So I cooked her dinner. We had chicken nuggets and chips. Which I should also add, I hadn't cooked in
lockdown.
Well, I hadn't cooked in 21 years, so I've had to learn to cook as a result of my husband dying, because he was the cook. And then I bid to claw back control. Decided that I wouldn't tell people until later. I'd set up a WhatsApp group. So where you said about the Facebook post you had done, I had done a WhatsApp group for people to keep everybody updated, which was, again, my ridiculous attempt at being in control of this situation. And And I was like, well, I'll tell people when their children have gone to bed, because then they've all got a chance to process it before the morning. So again, I just sat on it. I did, I think it was about
what
9:30.
did you do? Did you sort of watch TV? Did you have a drink? What?
I don't know. I remember, like I say, I remember finishing Frozen. I remember cooking chicken nuggets and chips. I don't know what we did then. I literally haven't got a clue. I assume we watched TV. I don't.
You think it would be sort of emboldened or embedded into your memory, but you don't. You remember really random stuff. Like you talk about the kind of the kind of random and irrational feelings and thoughts that you're having. You know, Christmas decorations. I can remember the night that Ben died, thinking, but he won't be able to walk her down the aisle. She was 6 months old. She might not get married. You know, they are completely unfounded fears, but what they do is they stop you thinking about the reality, and the reality is that your world has just blown apart, and that the person that you have shared your life with for 21 years is never going to walk back through the door. And Emma, that is absolutely heartbreaking, and I'm so sorry that you, Rebecca, had to go through this. And hearing you talk about the loneliness of COVID, now my parents did, but I think that was because they had seen me go through this once. I don't think they could have watched me do it alone. So they moved in with me, but we went through a lot of very stressful COVID protocols, because my mum would like make me strip naked if I'd left the house and stuff, not in front of them. We're not weird. But it is that awful isolation and friends kind of dropping food packets at the end of the drive. And the thought that you are, I mean, it was horrible enough while he was perilously ill, but to be on your own when the person that you love has died, we talk a lot about the loneliness, the isolation, that feeling of being a little bit like a troll under the bridge, you know, you don't know where you fit anymore. And of course, in your situation, you literally don't have anybody to just reassure you. What on earth did you do, Emma? What did you do?
I don't know. Like, I am, as I said, I laminate holiday itineraries. I'm an organizer. And I kind of went into a classic trauma-based response of, let's keep busy. Because to not keep busy
same
would have meant I had to process it. But then this has caused complications for me later on down the line. So I went busy. I did the funeral. But you talking about the care package, one of my amazing friends, she dropped in one day, and it had a bottle of gin, bottle of tonic, box of tissues, 2 ready meals, and hair dye. And I was like, hair dye?
Oh, I love
And she said to me, she said, hairdressers are shut. She said, you've got a funeral in 2 weeks. You've got dark hair. You're going to be stressing that you can't dye your hair. So I've dropped it in for you.
What a thoughtful thing to do.
Yeah, just that morning, I had sent my mum out to buy me hair dye. So the timing of it was...
No way.
Yeah.
And actually, humanity doesn't always shower itself in glory, but there were moments of pure gold during COVID where people really showed themselves in their absolute best lights. Plenty of people didn't, but I think it's important to focus, like you talked so beautifully about the nurses and who gave you kindness. And I remember making these calls and then PPE'd up, you can't hear what they're saying, and you're trying to understand really quite complicated medical jargon. And I'm a layperson, I'm not a doctor. And if people took the time to be kind, it just meant the world, didn't it? It meant the absolute world. And I sent in dictaphones and they played them to him. And just knowing that somebody was going a little bit of an extra mile. But sorry, I completely went off on one of my tangents, as I do. You touched briefly then on a funeral. And obviously funerals were one of the really difficult aspects of losing anybody in lockdown. You know, even the Queen had to have a socially distanced funeral for her husband. So how did you do that?
It was, I can remember going to the funeral directors. They let us go in, and I know that a lot of people had to do it remotely, but they let us go in, and my mum came with me. We sat in the funeral directors, and I can remember them saying to me, what hymns? It's like, hymns? Like, what charity are you giving money to? What coffin? And well, actually the coffin was taken out of my hands because it was COVID. And I think that this was the other surreal thing for me, was that we weren't allowed to view him in the chapel of rest because it was COVID. He wasn't allowed to be dressed because it was COVID.
Oh, darling, this is
so
awful.
so it was just, again, I'm like, for me, I really struggled to process that he was dead. And I can remember going to Medway Hospital. So he died on the Sunday, and I went to Medway Hospital on the Wednesday, and they gave me his belongings in a plastic bag, which was his mobile phone, his Marvel lounge pants that he'd gone into hospital with, but that was it. I wasn't allowed anything else. And so he wasn't allowed to be dressed, and I didn't see him. And I was planning this funeral, and we were allowed 10. And then it was done online. No funeral cars, because it was COVID. They said that I could drive myself. And in the end, so somebody I know has a particularly nice Mercedes, and he put a screen up and drove us, which probably wasn't in the rules, but I wasn't driving myself to my husband's funeral.
Do you know what? Quite frankly, at that point, who cares, right?
Who cares? And people lined our street where we live, and as we pulled up outside the crematorium, his football team, so he managed a Sunday league football team, they were his lads, and the person he co-managed it with is one of my oldest friends, and he had messaged me and said, the lads want to do a flag, is that okay? And I was like, yeah, of course, Rob, that's fine, they can do a flag. And I envisaged something relatively small, and this flag was just massive, and it was outside the crematorium with a picture of his face on and the football team's logo, and they were all there in their training suits, hands behind their back, like a proper football team, doing a minute silence as we drove up to the crematorium. And it was the most moving thing. It was just, and you know, my best friend, another one of my best friends, she sat outside the crematorium and she watched it on her phone. My daughter's best friend, they and her parents watched it outside on their phones, and she said, I'm not leaving until I see Rebecca come out and I can see she's okay. So she sat there until we left. But he sang at his own funeral as well. That was my little pull it out the bag moment. Because, so I'd say, he was a singer, and the morning after he died, someone sent me a video of him singing Fields of Gold. And it just, and obviously the lyrics are, you'll remember me when the west wind blows. And I went, we're having it, he's singing. Don't care, he's singing at his funeral. And no one knew. And so I kind of, that was and the people who were in the crematorium were like, why didn't you warn us? I was like, because this was my special nod to him. And then we walked out of the crematorium, and his cousin's wife, they are godparents to Rebecca, and his cousin's wife looked at me and said, do you want a hug? And I said, no, because if I get one, I'm going to break. And she went, do you need to break? And I went, I can't, please don't hug me.
Oh, Emma.
And then
to be so frightened of being held by somebody.
Yeah. And then the first time I was hugged by someone that wasn't Rebecca was the day before his birthday in July. So 3 months after he died, when I formed a support bubble with my sister. And so my sister hugged me, and she was the first person.
So 3 months, no human contact.
No. And then when I said earlier about
contact, that's so sad.
Yeah. And when I said earlier about the complications, so, and then keeping busy. So during this time, I've then started going on a bit of a mission that he won't be a statistic. So I've recorded podcasts with people. I've put a memorial bench in place for him. And I then decided we were going to have a memorial service for him on his birthday the following year. So 15 months later. So I organised a memorial service 15 months later, which we were still under COVID restrictions. So I still couldn't get everybody that I wanted. But people were allowed to hug me. And
yeah,
I got absolutely drunk. And it was the first time I'd been drunk in 15 months. And I taught my daughter the difference between being drunk and being completely hammered, which is what mummy was. And
Well, it's a good life lesson.
It was a good life lesson, but everyone was hugging me and I just felt vulnerable. And lovely, but vulnerable. And I can remember the following morning just waking up and I just thought I was hungover. I didn't think anything of it. And then I can remember logging on to the work call at 9:30 on the Monday morning. And somebody said, "How did it go? Are you okay?" And I went, "No, I'm not okay." And I just cried. And they went, "Emma, shut the laptop down." And that should have been my indication that I should take some time. Because I should add, I went back to work 3 weeks after the funeral to give Rebecca normality because we were working from home. So I wasn't going to London.
Right.
And I just thought if I locked myself away on a laptop, it gave her some normality of mummy working, given she didn't go back to school for 6 months. And then so I logged off that day. And then the following day was a Tuesday and I logged straight back onto work because of this whole keeping busy. The Wednesday I went to a different office in Gatwick and I drove back from that office and then couldn't remember driving back and rang the counselling helpline again. And because I can remember just sitting in my lounge and looking at Rebecca and I went, "Rebecca, I'm tired. I'm so tired." And she was like, "It's okay, mummy." And she just cuddled me. And I rang the counselling helpline and I just completely broke. And I was like, my husband's dead. And I think the memorial service just crystallized it because it was the first time all these people had been in a room, like his family and my friends, and people hugged me. And my best friend, I should also add, she lost her partner to COVID 9 months after Charlie. And so the first time that her and I hugged was at his memorial service. Yeah. And so we still hadn't hugged.
You and your best friend.
Yeah, one of my best friends.
Oh my God.
So she lost her partner 9 months after I lost Charlie and still we did not hug. And so the first time her and I hugged was at the memorial service. And so there were all these emotions and I logged on to, so I've broken down and the counsellor on the other end of the phone said, "You need an assessment, you need to be referred for therapy, but we can't do that tonight because you are too drained. You need to ring back tomorrow." And I said, "Okay." And then the next morning I logged on to work. I've been told this by
and you didn't follow it up.
And I logged on to work.
And you didn't follow it up then?
No, well, sort of, because then I logged on to work and then we have what's called a career coach. So they're there for your well-being and support. And I had a call with her and I just cried on her and she went, "Emma, do you need someone to tell you to turn this laptop off?" She said, "Listen to everything you are telling me and tell me what you would do if someone was telling you this." And I said, "I would tell them not to work." She said, "So why are you working?" I said, "Because I don't know what else to do."
Of course you would.
I don't know what else to do. And so she said, "Shut the laptop. You're not working." "And how does that make you feel?" And I was like, "Relieved." And she said, "Shut it. Go and get that assessment and take time off." And I took 5 days because I was then on holiday for a week. I started therapy again. I should also add by this point, I've also become an ambassador for Widowed and Young, the charity. So I'm keeping busy. I'm still keeping busy. And then I was in therapy and we carried on going. And so this was July 2021. And I thought I was getting better And then February 2022, the start of February, I had a counselling appointment and I was broken. And the reason I was broken in February 2022, so bear in mind we're nearly 2 years after I lost him, was because I was having to adjust to a normal life. I was having to adjust to a social life. Running around with Rebecca, with her dancing, with me having to go back to the office and go to London and juggling childcare and doing it all by myself and trying to be everything to everybody at work and everything to everybody at home and trying to be this Wonder Woman. And I couldn't do it. And I had a counselling appointment and she said, "If you don't stop, you are going to have a nervous breakdown." But this is nearly 2 years later. it took. And this is what I mean about the delayed and the complicated grief that we went through, Rebecca and I. And she said, I recommend you go and see a doctor today. And that doctor signed me off work for a month. And I got to a month later and that doctor signed me off for another month. And it was surreal. I'm like, it's nearly 2 years later. But even then I was like, God, what must people think of me? This is what I should have done when he died.
Yeah.
Not now. Why? I don't want people
Yeah.
judging me that I'm feeling like this now. But it was because of, we were in lockdown for nearly a year. We didn't see people. I wasn't hugged by people for 15 months. There was just like this catalogue of everything that conspired. And I ended up being off work for about 2.5 months. And then we had a charity event for him in June last year, which I called Charlie Fest. And
funnily enough, I've just hosted Woodstock here on Saturday, which you will now be invited to next year because you've now done a record, you see. If I'd known how close you were, Emma, I would have invited you anyway.
And so we had Charlie Fest, which was raising money for ITU. And the reason I mention this is I just want to say again about how amazing ITU were. So one of my friends said, there's a lady here who'd like to speak to you. And I looked at her and I was like, oh, I don't know who she is, but I'll go over and speak to her. And she looked at me and she went, hi, my name's, and I went, I know your name. And it was Noreen, the nurse. And she didn't even need to tell me her name. She came to Charlie Fest. She didn't even need to tell me her name. As soon as I heard her voice, I knew exactly who she was. She came along to pay her respects because she still thought of me and Rebecca often. And so she came along. And so I finally met her at Charlie Fest last year and we raised $3,500 for Medway ITU. And I think this is the amount of money. I think I worked out recently that the amount of money. So I've also done a charity calendar for him. And this is what I mean about you keep busy when you go through trauma. He was a part-time photographer as well. So, singer, photographer, jack of all trades. And I did a charity calendar with his photos. That's just raised over £2,000. We did $3,500 at Charlie Fest. I think in total since he died and all the donations that were made when he first died, we've now done over 10,000 for charity in his memory.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And I think that this is it's hard, but he won't be a statistic of the pandemic. And if I can do anything to help others and to do something as a result of it, then that's a good thing. And he would love the fact that people are being helped in his memory.
Yeah. As you said that, then I just wrote down the word legacy and sort of circled it because we've had quite a lot of guests talk about legacy. And actually, I believe you know Emma Gray, don't you? And her husband was really frightened of being forgotten.
Yeah.
And I noticed when I was sort of reviewing your application that you work for Way, which is Widowed and Young and a support network that we advocate for because we really believe in the work that they do. And I think what you have done is you've created the legacy for Charlie. You've raised money. You've raised an enormous amount of money in his name. And you're making sure that, as you say, he's not a statistic. I hate saying that word, sorry. And that he's not forgotten, because I think our greatest fear is being forgotten. And I think our secondary fear is that the people that we love are forgotten.
Yeah.
And by talking about him, and actually, and I know this sounds a little bit disingenuous because it's my podcast, but I do think by doing these, you get to put out your version of who they were, and that will stay out there for as long as you want it to be there. And I really admire you for doing this, because it is very easy to slide into the woe is me and the poor me, and we are very entitled to do that, and I think it's important that we do. But to turn your pain and your trauma into something positive, I guess we're doing it over here as well. And it feels, to say it feels good, but it does. It's I don't know, if you can turn something awful into somebody else's guide of how to get through it, then it hasn't all been agony, has it?
Yeah, and I think that's it. And I can remember a month after he died, I said to Rebecca, this does not define us. This is part of us, but this does not define us. And
Emma, I'm going to jump in on that one, because that's exactly what we say about the children. We say this, those words, we say, this is an awful thing that has happened to us, but it is not going to define the life that you lead and the choices that you make, because so easy, I think. And we have moved because, as I said to you before, I used to live in Faversham, and I was very aware that we were the family that his husband died diving. And whereas, yes, it is important, and obviously the schools know, and they tell if they want to, they can tell their friends, but it isn't a defining aspect of them. They're amazing human beings in their own right.
Yeah, and I think that that's it. And I also, again, we talk about the positives that come out of it, and that is something I have struggled with, the guilt, in a way, that I'm able to still achieve. And not so much Rebecca, because she would have always done that, but the fact that I keep going. So I launched a blog in March 2021. Everyone had said to me, you need to start writing, because I'd been doing these social media posts and they were getting longer and longer, and everyone said, you need to start writing, it's going to help people. Now, I didn't write before he died. I would get him to do birthday cards because I said he had a better way with words, and I didn't write. Ironically, I went to university to study journalism, and I dropped out after 3 months because I didn't think it was the right course for me.
Shut up. You studied journalism. Whereabouts?
Southampton Institute. But I dropped out after 3 months. Southampton Institute.
I did my degree in journalism. I finished mine, but I did my degrees in journalism.
Yeah. Well, yes, there you go, coincidence. But I dropped out and I didn't write. And so everyone said to launch a blog. And I did. And it's been nominated 2 years in a row now for the Helen Bailey Award, Fire, Widowed and Young. And I get messages from strangers saying, I don't know if you need to hear this today, but you've helped a stranger. And when I get messages like that, it's so humbling. And I wrote a blog for Children's Grief Awareness Week. It's incredibly
powerful.
Yeah, and I wrote a blog for Children's Grief Awareness Week last week on my perspective of my child's grief. And I started it and said, I'm not an expert on grief. I'm not an expert on bereavement, but I am an expert on my child. And I had child psychologists retweeting it about people needed to read this because this was a take on children's grief. And I was like, well, it's just my ramblings. It's just my thoughts. But again, if that can help people, it's real. And I am real. And it's funny because everybody says, oh, you share everything. And I'm like, no, I do not share everything. I share what I am comfortable to share. I share the parts of my story that I am happy for people to know about. I don't share everything. But if I can share anything, and it does, and when I've been nominated for the last 2 years, I'm like, oh my God, I'm starting to accept now that maybe I might be good at this writing, Lark. Good. But again, that is guilt. You feel guilt that this has happened to me because he died.
Oh, honestly. All the time. And same over here. We started off doing much like you did this, started your blog. I'm basically struggled with the commitment of writing. I would like to write a book. We'd all like to write a book, right? And somebody suggested podcasting, and I found it quite helpful because I'm a perfectionist. And so if I write something, I will rip it apart, start again. Whereas with this kind of genre of broadcast, I don't do the editing. So I don't always listen back either because I get imposter syndrome. But I found it much easier for me to be able to speak and vocalize this way and share my experience. And I do think by writing a blog and by showing, you talk about the response from other people, and much like you, we would get many emails into our inbox and it's just people saying that it's kept them going through the nights. And I never set out to do that, but what a wonderful side effect of it if people are finding some comfort. And I kind of set out to create something that I would have needed. And I genuinely think that back then, maybe initially I might have found the kind of arc, the coming back up out a bit difficult to listen to. But I think it gives people hope that you have walked through hell and come out the other side. And hope is really the most powerful thing that we can give people in those early days, because you talk about, feeling hopeless. It's awful.
Yeah. And hope is a word. It's ironic you use the word hope. So I got my first tattoo in March this year. My daughter told me I was having a midlife crisis. She's like, you're 42 and you're getting a tattoo. And I was like, yeah.
Don't show her mine then.
But what my tattoo is, it's Charlie's handwriting with the word hope, because it's got me through the last 3 years. It's my daughter's middle name and it was my nan's maiden name. So I've got Charlie's. Yeah. So It's a tattoo of Charlie's handwriting that says hope, and it's on the back of my wrist.
That's
and
lovely.
So whenever I'm having a moment, I'm like, just don't lose hope, Emma. You can, no matter how crap it is.
Yeah.
And it is like, I don't sit here now. I kind of feel now I'm 3 years in and I finally feel I'm taking control of my life again. And I'm kind of in charge a little bit now. It's taken 3 years. Would that have taken less had I lost him in normal circumstances? We'll never know. But I kind of feel I'm back in control. And
yes,
that for me is really important. But that does not mean I don't have crappy days where I will sit and still ugly cry because he's not here. His birthday was July this year. He would have been 49, and it completely freaked me out that I'd have been the whole, enjoy the last year of your 40s and blah, blah, blah. Next year, I'll trade you in for a younger model. It was a running joke that when he turned 50, I was trading him in for a younger model. And his birthday this year, I completely freaked. And I went up to his memorial bench and I rang a friend and I was like, are you at home? And he was like, yes, I am. And I said, can you come to the bench? I need a hug. And I just sat at the bench sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. I hadn't done that I didn't do it on his birthday last year. And I'm 3 years in and feel a bit more in control.
No.
But I think the difference is, I think the longer you go through this, the quicker you can bounce back from those days. Like those days still happen.
Absolutely. The lows, the lows happen, but they feel a little bit less. So sometimes, I mean, I talked the other week, I ended up at, desperately in hospital because my low was so low and I didn't genuinely know that I was going to be able to claw back out. But you do. And one thing John says to me is that, this will pass. And interesting, on my tattoo on my leg, I've had non timere, which is Latin for do not be afraid.
Yeah.
And when you receive your thank you card, you will understand. It means, and I have that there because I've spent my entire life being afraid that I wasn't good enough, afraid that I couldn't do things. And having, losing the love of my life in such a catastrophic way. And you say 3 years. I went into therapy at 3 years because I was so drunk at my daughter's birthday. I realised that I needed help, and I had run, I had drunk, I had literally run. I did a bloody marathon. I like to get that into every episode, and you cannot outrun it. It catches you. And I'm now 2 years. It will be 2 years in November in therapy, and I've made some enormous changes to my life. But on the 5th anniversary of Ben's death, I stared at a wall and sobbed for 5 hours because I miss him. I miss the way he walks. I miss the way he talks. I miss the sound of his voice. And no matter how many years go by, that isn't going to get easier. In fact, that will get worse because the more time passes, the less time we have. And I think that's okay because you get up, you cry, and you get on with life. You're not stuck there indefinitely, but it's important to acknowledge and to talk about the fact that grief isn't linear and it does continue long after other people may expect it to.
Yeah, and the point you made earlier about when your daughter was little and who's going to give her away. My stepsister got married in 2021, so 18 months after Charlie had died, and my stepdad got up and started doing the father of the bride speech. And I had a panic attack and I ran out of the room, and my sister came after me. She was like, what's the matter? So I'd done the wedding and I'd cried during the vows. I cry all the bloody time. Like it's my release. I don't care where I cry. I'll cry on the tube. I cry wherever. So I'd cried during the vows. And then Amy looked at me. I was literally hyperventilating at this wedding. And she went, what is the matter? And I went, who's going to give Rebecca away? She was like, Emma, she's 11 and you don't need to worry about that right now. And I said, no, but I've not really thought about it until I'm watching someone do a father of the bride speech, and I don't know who's going to give my daughter away. And and Amy was like, well, we'll just find someone. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Someone will do it. In a way, my sister keeps me so grounded. She has been phenomenal.
Does she?
She's so grounded. She just keeps it real all the time. And for me, I need that. I said earlier about Rebecca's godparents, and every now and then when I'm like, but my husband died, and Kelly will sit there and she's like, Emma, it's been 3 years, we're bored, move on. But
pull yourself together.
She's like, just get over it. Like, come on. She does not mean that in any way.
Stop whining on about that.
She's like, we're bored of hearing this now, Emma.
But you need somebody to be able to joke with you.
And actually, I think you need that when you've gone through this. And there are only certain, like other people would hear her say that and be absolutely horrified. But there are certain people you can do that with.
Well, it's like my alive and dead husband.
Yeah.
Some people look at me like I'm just this kind of evil incarnate when I say it.
Yeah. And like I say, one of my best friends and I, we've both lost our other halves to COVID. And there's a very nice brand, well, not that I want to advertise, but there is a brand of rum called Dead Man's Fingers, and other brands are available. But her and I joke about having a dead man in the fridge. And we're like, oh, it's been a bad day. She's like, do you want to get the dead man out? Like, and again, it's just our humour. And but again, there are certain people that are like, what are they on about now? And it's like, no, we're just going to get drunk with the dead men. So, yeah.
But I love this. But don't you think as well, another, my favourite topics is the benefit and the importance of peer support, which obviously from way, but also, I mean, by default, your best friend went through a similar thing. And again, Emma, this is freaking me out a little bit because my best friend from childhood, her husband died during COVID. And it wasn't from COVID, it was from cancer, but she experienced the same limitations on funerals and also did a memorial, and her daughter sang. So there's a few similarities, but it's it's that kind of being, we've got our widowed friends that we met through being widowed, but it's kind of weird when you've got one that you came into the club together. And I imagine that's been quite a support for each other, but also in many ways quite difficult because your emotions are different, right?
Yeah. And it was when he died, I couldn't. So when Charlie died, she came round the next morning with the lasagna, with the shepherd's pie, which everybody appears with shepherd's pie or lasagna for you to put in the freezer, right, when someone dies. And she came round that day and she just stood on my drive and cried at me. And then when Nick died, I couldn't bring myself to take anything to her house. And I couldn't do what she had done for me the day after because it was too raw. And I was going through this emotion of understanding how she would feel losing her partner, whilst at the same time then going, Jesus Christ, this is how useless everybody felt when Charlie died. And I can't do anything to help her. I can't go in her house because Kent had gone into like tier 3 or whatever it was called back then. It was Jan 2021 that he died. And I was like, I can't do anything. And eventually I went round, I think 2 weeks after he died, and she just opened the door to me and we both just stood there and just sobbed. And it's surreal because no two experience is the same, right? We all grieve differently. We all do things differently. But that, to have someone who you've known, so her and I met at postnatal group. So we've known each other 13 years. She used to work with Charlie as well. So she lost, not only did her friend lose her husband, she lost her colleague. Like they would go to work together and their sense of humour was just ridiculous. Like they'd go and do the shopping for buffets and things and they'd be picking up cucumbers and it was like, oh, do you like the girth on this one? And, you know, all stuff like that, trying to off-put other shoppers and stuff like that. Never not funny. And they'd be doing this. And she lost her friend too when Charlie died. She didn't just lose her friend's husband. She lost her friend and her colleague, and they'd go to work and everything together. And, you know, so many people lost someone amazing when my husband died. And I think for her and I, it's just been the most ridiculous bonding experience that you could ever expect. Like never ever did I want one of my closest friends to be able to go, oh yeah, no, I get it. But in a way, it isn't, wrong choice of words, but it is lovely to have someone who knew you before. But you know, equally the very lovely Emma Gray who you had on, she's somebody who I've met after Charlie died as a result of Way, and you know, she's a fabulous comfort blanket. And but she knows me. We do love Emma, but she knows the person I am now, and I've always said. The person I was when I was married, I think she died the day Charlie died. And, you know, I often
say she doesn't exist anymore.
She doesn't exist. And I can look at photos of me, and there's a photo in particular that I look at of our last Christmas together, and I almost don't recognise the two people in it. which is me and Charlie, and I look at them and I'm like, oh, they look like nice people, but I don't necessarily associate it being me. And
they look really happy.
Yeah, and it's just a case of, I'm still, I still love Jason Donovan. I'm still going to marry him when I grow up, and I still laminate my holiday itineraries. And I still am in the same job, and I'm still a mum, and I've still got a lot of the same friends, but I'm not who I was before. And I do think I died. I don't exist. The person I was before doesn't exist. The person I am now, I think, is more vulnerable. She's allows herself to accept help, which is a big, big struggle for me. She is stronger. She's kinder. I'm more empathetic now. And again, it's taken me 3 years to get to a point where I can say, you know what, I am good enough, and we're gonna be all right. It's taken me 3 years to get to that point. Yeah.
I'm just going to quickly interject because, like you mentioned earlier, sorry, I know I've kept you on a bit longer than normal. I told you, I said, maybe an hour. You mentioned about kind of wanting to create this perfect environment for your daughter. And I just wanted to touch on that because I'm in the middle of, summer holidays, as we all are.
Yeah.
And I really struggle with perfectionism. It's something I struggle with anyway, but also primarily with the children. And I think the obligation that you feel to give them this charmed, wonderful life. And I think for a long time you feel under such a lot of pressure to do that. And then you use the term they're good enough. And I really think that there is a power in those two words, because I have 4 children. My time is split 4 ways anyway. And there are time clashes where I can't be in 2 places, or I will miss something because I'm being pulled in so many directions. And I just used to feel like the whole world was going to crumble and that I was such a failure. Whereas now I give myself a lot more compassion, and equity is a word that I've started to use, because I am neurodivergent. I am widowed and I have 4 children. Like, you have to grant yourself a little bit of kindness, and that's something I've learned. And I was very much a looked after wife, I we had very kind of traditional gender roles in the house, and I did find out that I was strong and that I was capable, and I really wished I hadn't had to find out in such a horrible way. But it's a weird, because part of me is just constantly frightened and part of me is just not frightened, because the worst happened, right? The worst happened. I mean, let's not delve into things that could be worse, but it happened, and you're terrified that something awful is going to happen again. But you're also very aware of how much living is left and how important living is. And I do think I can see it in yourself, and I hear it in everybody I speak to on here, is that conscious decision that they have died and a version of you has died. But there's a big old world to explore out there. And it's such a disservice to them and to us if we don't do that. And I love hearing people and finding out what they're doing and what they're turning this tragedy into. And you're no exception. I've loved talking to you today. Emma, I do ask people, and you don't have to answer this at all, but I just wondered whether you, whether there was anybody romantic in your life, or whether that's something that you were interested in exploring or not. Everybody's different.
Yeah, everyone is different. It is, and I know you've spoken on previous podcasts about your children being younger. It is a very difficult thing for my daughter to contemplate.
Of course it is.
She has.
And is she 13?
She is 13 now.
She has been a 13-year-old son.
She has been known to use the phrase "you're not allowed," and I think I did try the dating apps last year, and I'll be honest,
soulless, right?
Oh my God, it's the most depressing thing in the world. And I think when you're having to Google the acronyms that are in people's profiles because you don't understand them, there's your first indication that this is not right for you. And then when you get what the acronym stands for and you still don't understand, so you then have to Google the full term, and you're like,
and then wish you hadn't
understand what it means, and now I'm really freaked out. I was like, God. But I think, I think it was really interesting, and what it showed for me last year was that actually I probably just needed a bit of flattery. I don't think I was completely ready last year when I did it. I wanted someone
You miss that, don't you? And we don't
Yeah.
talk about that. I miss being told I was gorgeous and, having my bum pinched and, not being able to, bend over without somebody going, oh, well, you're down there. Just the silly kind of camaraderie and sort of slight sexual innuendos. Yeah.
And
you miss that. And actually you miss being a woman.
Yeah. And, so much of my energy has gone into being a mum, and absolutely rightly so. And I think I put a lot of my energy into being a mum, being a colleague, being good at my job, and almost in a way being a widow, which I don't know if that sounds weird, but I was like, right, I am Charlie's widow.
No, it doesn't at all.
Therefore, we will do the memorial bench and we will do the articles and we will write stuff about him in the local newspaper, and I'll do this. And I have to do him justice as a widow. And again, I think it's taken me 3 years now, and I get to the point where I'm like, I am more than a widow and I am me. And, I talked to Rebecca about it, and I'm like, but you're going to live your life and have this amazing future. She wants to be on the West End and she wants to be on Broadway. And, part of me thinks that little girl is so
she's
determined.
A dancer, is she?
Musical theatre. She's a singer. She's just like her dad. And when we did Charlie Fest last year, not only did Charlie sing
I have a little one of these. I must talk to you about this.
Yes, I can share tips. But so Charlie Fest last year, Charlie sang with the band. His band were amazing. They worked with an ex-Abbey Road producer. So they lifted 6 songs where Charlie sang at Charlie Fest. So and I've got videos of it, and it was just astonishing. So his band were all there, and then his voice, we had his microphone out, and then his voice came out. And again, it was a gamble because nobody knew it was going to happen other than me, Rebecca, and a couple of close people that I'd told so they could hold me up. And I was like, this is a gamble. It's either everyone's going to go, Emma, you're insane. What the heck was that? We don't need that. Or people are going to, and it just was perfect. And like a lot of the football team were there, and they were like, oh my God, Emma, we didn't know we needed to hear his voice again. And thank you for bringing him to this room. And Rebecca got up and she sang 4 songs that he used to sing with the band, with his band there as well. Like she just got up and just rocked out like Seven Nation Army and Green Day and whatever. Like she's amazing. And so her and I talk about it. I'm like, but when you go off and you live your life and, you hopefully meet someone and you have your future, what is there for me? And, other than marrying Jason Donovan, which is still the life plan.
Yes.
I do. Yeah, I just think, do you know what? It would just be nice to have someone. It would just be nice to have someone love me and to, sit with and go out for dinner with, and, just. I don't think I could live with someone again. I think I've become a bit too selfish, but.
Well, there is that. Yes, we get very set in our ways. In fact, a friend of mine is moving up to live near her boyfriend. Like, it feels weird to call people of our age boyfriends, and but her and the children are going to live in a separate house, and they're going to have continue the relationship. But she just said, I don't want to share my house anymore, and all power to her. I wondered how John would feel if I moved out and left him with the 4.
We could do it. Let's try it. But yeah, I think and I think that's that I am quite set in our ways. And, I said to her last week, we went up to stay with a friend in Newcastle, and her and I had a day, and we were walking around Newcastle city centre, and we were doing a spot of shopping, and her and I went for lunch, and we went for a drink and stuff. Non-alcoholic, I hasten to add, when I say her and I went for a drink. So I realised how dodgy that sounded. And I looked at her and I said, do you know what? I said, even if I did meet somebody, I was like, this doesn't change. I said, this is so important to me, our time together. I said, you and I are always going to have that. Like we've done, we did Florida last year, we did New York last Christmas, and I'm bravely doing the West Coast of the USA and driving by myself for the first time ever abroad next year. I still want those adventures with her. She's the most,
how wonderful.
Slightly terrified, but we have become, her and I are this formidable team now. We absolutely are. And I wouldn't ever want that to change if someone came into my life, because I think as a result of her being an only child and the way we were just locked down together, we had no option but to kind of grieve from the off. Like, we had no option. Lots of other people, and I've got friends who said, but we weren't seeing any other friends. So we didn't really think about the fact we weren't seeing Charlie because we weren't seeing anybody. So it didn't feel like he was dead for a long time.
Yes.
And I've got a friend of mine, he was an usher at our wedding, and he talks about, you know, those moments when he's like, but Charlie's dead. It's not just dead. It's not just a word. He's dead, gone forever, dead. And whereas Rebecca and I were just the two of us against the world for such a long time, that the bond we have is something I'm actually incredibly proud of, that her and I went through the worst thing in the world. And yet, I mean, don't get me wrong, she's a teenager. There are hormones at play. My hormone, I'm a woman of a certain age now. My hormones are all over the show as well.
I hear
you know, it's not, I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's the easiest time in our house. It's not. But we are an incredible bond. And I think a lot of that also comes back to that honesty point I made from the off, that, you know, her and I have always been honest. We talk about things. And yeah, so yes, would I like someone at some point? Yes, I think I would. Have I? Is there anyone? No. But am I ruling it out?
The door's open, and I think
the door is open.
And I think that's a healthy way to look at it, because you don't want to settle for somebody just because you don't want to be alone. And we're very aware that, you know, and another thing I find really interesting is the ability to love again. And I've talked about this at length, because you don't expect that you will be able to, particularly when you have been so desperately in love with your husband or your partner. But somehow I found it enabled me to love again. I know that sounds really strange, because we hadn't had the anger and the bitterness or anything like that. And I also knew what a good relationship looked like. So I wasn't going to accept anything other than, inverted commas, perfection. We know there's no such thing as perfection. And I think you're right. You know, if they come along and it's right, brilliant. But you know, and the thing with the children is so interesting, because of mine are older now, and God, the thought of, like, if it happened now, no, like, it would be so difficult. But I also really resonated with the idea of this bond, because my eldest, he's a boy, but we're incredibly close, and we're real friends. And I think that becomes, I share my feelings with him, and he shares his with me, not all the time, because again, teenager. But yeah, the bond that you create with the tribe that you pull through together, it's an unbreakable bond. And I think one day, and I have to say, Monty actually has, one day they will turn around and say, thank you for everything you did for us. Can I have a fiver? Probably. No, my kids.
Yeah, and I think that's that. You know, right now, and I think it's really interesting, because I did say to my friend who lost her partner to COVID a few months back, and I said, do you know what? Part of me does think I'll be on my own for forever. And she got really upset when I said that. And I said, it's not because I don't feel I'm worthy, but actually I do feel fulfilled in my life at the moment. And, you know, I teach Rebecca all the time. I'm like, you don't need validation from others. You know, having said that, last year I actually wanted to be, you know, desired and complimented and flirted with.
You are human. You are human.
I am human. But actually, there's part of me that's like, do you know what? Right now, I've got my job. I've got my health. I've got amazing family and friends around me. I've got, you know, I had a friend come down from York who stayed last weekend, and I have never, ever laughed so much as we did last weekend with Vicky when Vicky was down. And, you know, I've got that. I've got
Vicky
volunteering. No, she's a lady. We are only friends because of Jason. There is a common theme here, but her and I are only friends because of Jason. But
I saw this on Facebook.
Yeah. And, you know, and it's one of those things again, but kindness. You know, there was a gig that got cancelled, and she said to me, if you can get to Leeds, I've got 2 tickets for Jason. I don't think anyone's more deserving than you. This was October 2021, and I'd never met her before. And things I would never have done before. I travelled to Leeds taking somebody at face value that she was going to give me tickets, and she did. And she makes me laugh so much. But that kindness of, if you can get to Leeds, you can have these tickets. No one deserves them more than you do. And, you know, she's fabulous. She came down last weekend, and we did that. And I've got, like I say, Rebecca and Rebecca's performing is just going phenomenal. You know, she danced at Disneyland Paris last year. They've auditioned to do it again next year. Yeah. And so she did that. And I've got my volunteering and all the stuff I do for Way and my ambassador role. And, you know, my life took a turn, and my life went in a complete spiral and not where I saw it going at all. But I can't, you know, and I wish every day that I could bring him back. And I wish every day that my daughter's father was still here and she wasn't growing up without him. And I wish I could change what had happened to us. But equally, I can't sit here, Rosie, and say I have a bad life, because I don't.
No.
I have a relatively
and you're allowed
good life.
to have a good life.
I have a relatively good life that had something catastrophic happen in it that will always be a part of me. And, you know, I met someone recently and I was talking to them and I said, oh, you know, confession time, I'm actually a widow. And their response was, why is that a confession? It's just part of who you are. And I just thought, for me, it's always such a big
part of what
thing.
Makes us who we are.
It's part of it. And it's always for me such a big thing to say, I was widowed and this is the crap I've gone through. When actually, and again, that's what I mean about coming to this realization that I'm more than a widow. It is part of me. And I think for so long, it was all consuming. And I was like, oh my God, I'm a widow. I was widowed at 39. And I you know, I'm a solo parent to my daughter. And we run around like loons most of the time, you know, like, and quite frankly, if ever I was to consider dating, I don't even know where we fit them in. I work full time. I run around. I've got a dog. She has dance rehearsals, you know, my life's like a military mission. My life is planned 3 months in advance. So my babysitters are sorted. I'd be like, they'd be like, can I see you? I'd be like, yes, March the 3rd, 2024. I can offer you an opening.
See, I need to be more like you. I double book, triple book.
Oh no, I'm literally planned. My mum, again, back to my mum, she's got a family organizer calendar and they've got a column for me on their own family organizer now, which I don't think she expected. So they know when I'm in London at work and when they've got to have Rebecca and babysitting and all stuff like that, they've got their own column. But this is my life. But like I say, it's a good life. I have fun. I smile. I look at pictures of me now. And I said to my sister recently, I was like, why didn't nobody tell me how shockingly crap I still looked in 2021? Like 18 months later, like I looked at pictures in 2021. I was like, oh, I look so much better than 2020. I was in 2021. I thought I was in a better place. And now I look back at those pictures. I'm like, I was still like, and I think people underestimate how much grief affects you physically as well as mentally.
Yes.
And I look back at these pictures from 2 years ago and I was like, I still looked unhealthy. I didn't look healthy in 2021, which was 18 months later. Whereas now I can look at pictures of me and go, yeah, you look good for a 42-year-old hormonal nightmare of a widow who's stressed, works full time. Yeah, who's works full time.
This is one thing. I look in the mirror and go, "It's all right.
It's all right."
Could be worse.
And you know, I said to somebody yesterday, they mentioned about the fact I've got grey hair now, and I was like, "Yep, I've given up dyeing it because you know it's too much like hard work." I put the highlights in to try and hide some of the grey. I said, but the realization I've come to is that growing old is a privilege. And if I'm getting grey hair now, it's because I'm getting older and we can't take that for granted. So why not just embrace the fact we're getting older and, you know, just kind of just live life. And,
Can
you
we
know,
still have
Charlie,
Botox?
well, yeah, I think I'd be scared of the needles, but Charlie lived life to the full. I think I'd be too scared of the needles, but he lived life to the full. And the fact he'd had cancer when he was 24, you know, what he crammed in between the age of 24 and no, not 24. That's when he and I got together. So he had cancer when he was 26. So between the age of 26 and 45, when he died, that man crammed so much in. He, like I said, he was a part-time photographer. He was in 3 bands. He ran a football team. He was a brilliant father. He was the most supportive husband ever. And he was loved by so many people. And he crammed that in after his cancer diagnosis with, do you know what? I'm going to live my life. And actually the biggest tribute I can give to him is to live my life and to make sure that his daughter, who he adored, lives her life. And that we talk about that legacy word again. That's the legacy he's left me, is to live. And I talk about, I now feel I am living, not existing.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely get that. And I think that you have spoken very beautifully about the arc, you know, the in depths of the tragedy and how you have to claw yourself back out. And
Mm,
I think that is what people who have perhaps not been through something like this find so interesting,
mm,
because we all believe that if something like that happened, that we wouldn't survive it.
yeah.
I was not renowned for my resilience, shall we say. And to be fair, I didn't survive it in the best way. I drank a lot, but survive it we did, and we
Mm,
lived to tell the tale. And here we are at the top of our mountain, and we're looking back
yeah.
at how far we've come. And I think that you and I and everybody else who's going through things like this should be so proud of how far we've come. And it sounds like you are able to do that, to kind of take stock. And I'm really pleased to hear that from you. And it genuinely has been a pleasure to hear your story. And the only reason I'm calling time on it now is because we've gone into an hour and a half, and it just becomes an editing nightmare. So I am going to have to draw us to a close down. But I'm so flattered and touched that you came on and spoke so openly and candidly about such a unique devastation. And there are many similarities along the way
Mm,
between myself and John, but I felt some of them when you talked about the memorial and not having the closure. I felt that from Ben, because
yeah.
I never saw Ben's body. It's never been found. And I not because of COVID, but obviously I didn't have a funeral, we had a memorial.
Yeah.
And that lack of clarity and closure is very, very
Mm.
it adds to the complexity. So I really sympathise with you in that. And yeah, I would like to give you a hug, Emma. And actually, because we live so close, I think we will
I think
facilitate
we
this
will.
happening at some
And
point.
yes, I think a hug and a coffee would be absolutely lovely.
I think absolutely. But for now, my darling, you take care of yourself and everybody else. If you have been affected by this episode, please do let us know. Our inbox is open. But until next time, take care of yourselves.